Of course, President Johnson, relatively still new to the university, has stated in numerous formats, including her investiture, that the university should target a neutrality date no later than 2040. So this activity will begin to ramp up. I should note, of course, that COVID has had a big impact. I noted the 15% reduction between 2011 and 2019. But over the past 2 years, the university emissions fell by 36%. Obviously, that's largely COVID related, but it does include some proactive steps the university has taken towards energy efficiency measures. But we know that those emissions are artificially low, particularly for our scope 3 transportation related emissions. So this is going to be a very important conversation for us moving forward, as the university does currently purchase renewable energy credits associated with some of its electricity. Notably, all of the university's non-Columbus campus electricity purchases carbon neutral, offset by those REC purchases. But we do not have a program in place for the purchase or use of other types of carbon offsets, which is really how other higher ed institutions who have achieved their carbon neutrality goals have done so, by purchasing off the voluntary market to offset their annual emissions. So we will certainly need to develop programming, particularly in regards to our scope 3 emissions, for sources such as air travel and student and employee commuter emissions, until those sectors are fully transitioned to sustainable and carbon-free fuel sources. So even as we conduct significant work to transition our building energy delivery systems, including considerable energy conservation measures, which will reduce our overall annual emissions. Carbon offsets are going to be a necessary tool for the university to consider in order to achieve its neutrality goal. Brent, hopefully that covered off on context for the university and set up this dialogue.
Yeah, thanks so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. It's so useful to see where we are in this sort of space at the moment. And I'm really, really excited that Barbara is able to be here with us today. Dr. Haya is the director of the Berkeley Carbon Trading Project in the Goldman School of Public Policy at the University of California at Berkeley. She received her PhD there at UC Berkeley in energy and resources, has an undergraduate degree. So interested to see in philosophy with a minor in physics, which I thought was really interesting. And actually is a fantastic background, I think, for this exact area of research that she's undertaken in sort of carbon offsets, because it's sort of a philosophical and a mathematical topic at the same time. And so you got someone here who's perfectly trained to sort of think deeply about these issues. And as far as I can tell, and sort of being immersed in this literature myself, what I can see is that Barbara has had a lot of influence over this sort of area of policy development. And it's had a big impact in terms of forcing people to think about these offsets and the way they think about them and the quality of them. So it's so exciting for me to have her with us today to talk about this issue and give her perspective, and also talk about it from the public policy perspective. So without further ado, Barbara, we'll turn it over to you. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this discussion with all of you and the audience. So I have studied, I've studied the quality of carbon offsets for over 20 years. I did my PhD at UC Berkeley Energy and Resources Group, studying the effectiveness and lack of effectiveness of the Kyoto Protocol's offset program, which was the first major carbon offset program that's now being renewed under the Glasgow agreements. And I found that the large majority of these projects didn't actually reduce emissions. Another larger study after mine put a number on that at 85% of projects most likely did not really reduce emissions. I then turned attention to California's second generation offset program, designed in a much better way, but the devil is in the implementation details, and found similar rates of over-crediting from the Forest Protocol, which has generated so far 82% of the state's cap and trade offset credits. 3 years ago, the University of California brought me on to help the system figure out its strategy for procuring offsets towards our carbon neutrality goal, which is to be carbon neutral in scopes 1 and 2 by 2025, and including scope 3 carbon neutrality by 2050. And there was a real interest in both figuring out how to procure offsets that are high quality, given the variability of quality on the market, as well as how to align the offset program with our research, education, and public service mission. And I jumped at the chance to really think through, how do you develop a program for how to do offsets right? And I developed, in collaboration with many others, a program that combines developing our own university-initiated offset projects linked to research and the work and bringing in students, and doing research on the quality of offsets on the voluntary offset market. And this will be a two-part presentation. I will go through the evolution of the offset market, chronicling the persistent quality challenges with examples and trying to diagnose what is going on. Why, after 20 years of offsetting, are we still seeing such large rates of overcrediting? And then discuss the approach that I developed for UC in more detail. And I'll go into some detail in that as your university is thinking about how to do your own offset program. I'll go into details as to what our thinking so far is in this program that I developed for UC, the University of California. And then I want to end with, okay, where do we go from here? Sorry, given the challenges, how do we move forward with an offset market that works? And what is the role of universities as a trusted analyst of offsets? What role do we play in pushing for a quality market that really works and can be trusted? So I will share slides. And why don't I start with a quick primer on offsets, just really quickly. Carbon offsets allow an emitter of greenhouse gases to meet an emissions reduction target obligation, whether it's voluntary, like a carbon neutrality goal, or it's compulsory, like being regulated under a cap and trade program, allows those emitters to pay someone else to reduce emissions instead of reducing their own emissions. And each credit should represent 1 ton of CO2 equivalent reduced or carbon removed from the atmosphere. This just gives a sense of what's out there on the voluntary market today. This breaks down the credits that have been generated so far. The largest source of credits globally are forestry, as well as renewable energy. And then there's a whole slew of other project types where I pulled out the most populous project types under the headings. And the idea of offsets is that greenhouse gases are well mixed in the atmosphere, so it doesn't matter where the emissions reductions happen. So it's an economic argument. If it's cheaper to reduce emissions somewhere else, to pay someone else to reduce emissions, the market allows that trade. The emitter emits more than their target in exchange for paying someone else to emit less. So offsets therefore don't really reduce net emissions. They simply trade or shift where the emissions reductions occur, which is why quality is so important. And a bit more on just quality is very important. And each week a new company announces a carbon neutrality targets, and these targets have the potential to steer a lot of funds into climate change mitigation. But since buying credits take the place of direct emissions reductions, low offset prices can make direct reductions even harder to justify. And inexpensive, poor quality offsets makes paying for quality offsets also harder to justify. And many corporate targets are being met mostly through offsets. And I worry that offsets could be the thing that allows us to say, pat ourselves on the back we've reduced emissions, but mostly on paper, squandering this brief window we have to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. First there was oil company funded misinformation campaign, and then there were poor quality offsets. So let me go through what I've seen over my years of looking at the market, and then let's think about what is a way forward for universities. So starting with the clean development mechanism. So this was the world's first major carbon offset program under the Kyoto Protocol. I did my PhD research focused on, I did field research in India, focused on this largest section of renewables, hydropower, wind power, biomass power, field research in India, and then desk reviews in more countries. And my research focused on looking at how these projects and how the offset incentive was working in practice. And a lot of my research focused on additionality. So the idea of additionality in the offsets world is that in order for a carbon offset to be valid, it needs to cause emissions to be reduced somewhere else. The projects that are funded need to be caused by the offset program. And if the program pays for reductions that would have happened anyway, the company buying them increases their emissions, but not in exchange for correspondingly causing emissions to be reduced somewhere else. And this CDM tests, the way that it looks at additionality is that it tests each project as to whether it's additional based on a 4-part additionality test, which I looked at carefully with these renewable energy projects in India. And, offsets are considered additional if they are not required by law. You can also prove that in addition, you have to prove that it's additional by either doing a financial test showing that the project is not financially cost effective without offsets, and or you could do a barriers test and show that the project has significant barriers so that the project wouldn't have gone forward were it not for the offset income. And my research showed that the financial test wasn't working. And it's very, the financial test is you present projections of what your the financial feasibility of the project is. And there were many assumptions that go into these financial projections of a project. And I showed that the levers that you can pull in your assumptions allows developers to show that cost-effective projects were not cost-effective. One example of this, just anecdotally, is one consultant told me that for some projects, he's created 2 financial sheets or financial projections for a single project. One that showed that the project was cost effective. He would send that to the bank for loans, to apply for loans. The other showing that the project was not cost effective and that he would send to the UN to apply for the offset program. Projects also have to show that they're not common practice. And in China, and this test also is not very effective. For example, in China, with the world's largest hydropower capacity, over 1,300 hydropower projects somehow demonstrated that their project was not common practice. And today, this share of renewable energy projects, many of these follow the same methodology as the CDM. I then turn attention to California's offset program, which I believe is structured in a much better way. Instead of testing the additionality of each project individually, the California had a narrower program where it identified specific project types where it deemed the projects were not likely to be additional, and they looked at quality across the whole portfolio. They could then, take a look at what's additional, what's non-additional, focus on project types that are mostly additional, but you can also counterbalance the non-additional participation with conservative methods for estimating emissions reductions, like setting the baseline, so that in total, the entire portfolio of projects doesn't overestimate the effect of the program on emissions. And like I said, the devil is in the details. And let's just take a look at how the Forest Protocol works in practice, with 82% of the total credits that have been generated so far under this program. And there are 4 quality issues, and I want to just talk about 2 of them. One of them is baselines and additionality. So here's how and let me just say, please feel free to ask questions along the way. If anything's not clear, I also welcome discussion. I know that this is a focus of research for some of the panelists. So, so on baselines additionality, here's the way the Forest Offset Protocol works. So basically any forest land owner in the US that manages their land in a way that holds more carbon per acre than the baseline is allowed to participate in the offset program, and they must commit to not depleting that carbon for 100 years. The baseline is commonly set at the average carbon per acre for that forest type. One problem with this is that by definition, half of forest carbon is on land that holds more than average carbon by definition. And there are many reasons why different landowners in different forest lands hold more carbon or less carbon than others. So what this protocol does is it allows forest landowners that have already been managing their land to hold more carbon than the average and would have done anyway, they can now participate and generate credits for what they would have done otherwise. And I think the real impact of this protocol is to function as an effective easement, right? It's that 100-year commitment not to deplete carbon. And that's a significant effect that this protocol is having. But I also argue that it's over-crediting because it's allowing the buyer to emit more today in exchange for paying landowners to perhaps change their practice sometime over the next 10 decades. And I think there are some ways to remedy this so that the baseline is not as generous in allowing for credit generation. The second issue that I want to highlight is leakage. Many of these landowners, or most of them, say that were it not for the offset program, they would have harvested aggressively to the baseline. So most of the lands that are participating are holding more carbon and reducing emissions by avoiding harvesting. One thing is, if you reduce timber harvesting on some lands, but you don't change the demand for timber products, you're going to cause some displacement of that harvesting and the carbon releases from that harvesting to other lands to meet demand. And there are 3 ways that the protocol accounts for leakage in a way that overcredits. And I'm happy to go through those if there's interest. But what I found is that the methods chosen to assess, to account for leakage is overcrediting today's real impact of these of this protocol on emissions by 50 to 80%. And that is if you believe in the baseline. I also want to talk about California's mine methane capture protocol. Another quality issue with offsets, in addition to additionality and baselines and just the methods used for estimating emissions reductions, is perverse incentives. And I worked with a team of people to look at look carefully at the development of California's mine methane capture protocol. And we found that there are several financial perverse incentives created by this financial incentive created by this protocol. The mine methane capture protocol pays mine owners to capture and destroy methane that would have otherwise been released to the atmosphere in the process of coal mining or after the coal mine has been abandoned. The way that offsets work is it creates a profit motive to incentivize to incentivize facilities to take action to reduce emissions. In the case of the coal mine methane protocol, we're increasing profits for coal mines, the most sturdy of industries. And we found that for the most gassy mines in the US, that the added profits from flaring methane and selling it as offsets is substantial enough to potentially extend the life of struggling mines. And that's something that the protocol really needs to carefully monitor, or the California Air Resources Board. We also I want to look at right. Offsets also invigorated lobbying against regulation, and we documented an instance where the Bureau of Land Management and an employee of them said that the agency was taking California's mine methane capture protocol into account in their decision as to whether and how to regulate or incentivize mine methane releases on federally owned lands. The implication is that given regulatory additionality, if they regulate, then the mine owners wouldn't be able to earn the revenues and the profits from selling offsets. The implication is that the protocol was a factor in their decision, in their final decision not to regulate those methane emissions. Of course, we don't know what the true impact was, what would have happened otherwise, but the statement made was that they were taking California's offset program into account. And just to say, the disincentive to regulate at the federal, state, local level is just one important consideration and concern about carbon offsets. Turning attention back to today's voluntary market offsets, and for my work with University of California, looking at detail at some of these protocols, more and more companies are taking on targets. There's an increase in targets each year to meet demand for offsets. And in the context of the UC work, I'm going to talk about this set of project types that we have to choose from. And before I turn to part two, are there any questions that have come up? Or I will.
Barbara, I'd like to ask a quick question.
Sure.
Going back to your forestry easement considerations just a few minutes ago, I'd love you to talk for just a minute about the legal implications of a 100-year easement, and how does that work when there's federal land, BLM, Forest Service land? What are the legal implications of federal policy in implementing a 100-year easement in those contexts?
So I'll tell you what I understand. So it's not really an easement, it's an effective easement, and it is a program run by the California government, where California's offset program allows projects to participate across the US. And it's the commitment of the forest land owner, which are almost all so far private owners. It's a commitment of the forest land owner to not deplete the carbon for 100 years from the last issuance. And they are required to do reporting each year for those and monitoring for the full 100 years. And that's as far as I know. I don't know the details of what that agreement is between the California government and the landowner and the level of enforcement. but one thing is that if there is a depletion of carbon, the credits need to be paid back by the landowner. Okay, and we can come back to questions. Let me launch into the second part and talk about this work that we've done for the University of California and what that program design looks like, which the university is currently in the process of considering. So the motivation was, as I said, there's a real hesitancy among the entire UC community, students, staff, faculty, to send funds off campus that would to buy offsets that would otherwise be used for research and education, and a real concern about the quality challenges and a real interest in making sure that, to the extent that we procure offsets, they really represent the tons of climate benefit that they represent. And there's also a strong preference for offsets aligned with UC's research, education, public service mission. So the task I've been given is, okay, how do we design a program that ensures quality and, to the extent possible, to engage research and education in that program? There was also a concern about reputational risk. It seems like every week there's another investigative reporting article that comes out showing that offsets that are being purchased and generated on the market are not high quality or non-additional or over-credited. Our process was in 2017, we did a sprint. So it was a small group of staff, faculty, students from across the campuses that met for 15 minutes every morning for several weeks, and did an intensive look at survey of faculty and students and thinking and priorities around offsets and also what's available on the market. Out of that process grew this CNI Carbon Neutrality Initiative funded project, which they brought me on to lead, called Developing UC's Offset Strategy. As a part of that, we developed a new offset policy for adoption. It's currently at the end of being considered and hopefully will be adopted in the spring. And then an offsets technical committee is currently considering this whole package that I developed in collaboration with many others, and to what the strategy is going to actually be going forward. So I'm going to really focus on this project over the last few years and the results and the proposal to UC. So it had, you could say, 6 different pillars, which all interacted with one another. So I worked closely with a cross-campus advisory committee and monthly meetings. This is mostly the sustainability directors from each of the 10 campuses, along with members from UC Office of the President and student representatives to guide this work with their priorities, but also to learn as I was learning. We developed this UC criterion priorities. We explored the development of university-initiated offset projects. We did research on the quality of offsets on the voluntary market. We developed policies and procedures for future purchases and release guidance, or about to, for other universities and colleges. And a lot of I'm really going to focus on these 3 things. So for the criteria, I want to go over, and forgive me for reading, but I want to go over the policy because this is really the cornerstone of the offset program. And this came out of a lot of discussions with faculty, students, and staff across the university. So in response to what we were learning about what's going on the market. So, and forgive me for reading, but this is the almost final policy for adoption. The university will prioritize direct reductions in its covered scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. The university will only use high quality offsets. They will draw on university academic capacity to vet those offsets, and will develop and implement our offset procurement strategy in a way that advances understanding of and models how institutions of higher education and in other sectors can use offsets as an effective climate mitigation strategy aligned with their institutional mission. And then in the policy, there are musts and priorities. And so here are the musts. So credits are considered to be real if the quantity of credits generated and used by the project or project type does not exceed conservative estimates of the actual effect of that project or project type on emissions. It's a very, I see it as minimum criteria. The credits that we buy should represent the amount of climate benefit that they represent and that they are used to offset. When there's uncertainty, so what does conservative mean? When there's uncertainty in emissions reductions, removals estimates are conservative. When they're more likely to underrepresent than to overrepresent actual emissions achieved, or emissions benefit achieved. The university will choose offset projects that demonstrate or advance scalable climate solutions aligned with a path towards deep decarbonization. The university will evaluate the quality of each offset project it uses involving a peer review process. And the university will avoid negative outcomes for low-income communities, communities of color, other marginalized populations, and prioritize projects that benefit those communities. And for the wants, we will prioritize projects that meet our priorities and values, projects that advance university research, support student education, such as involving students in applied educational projects, have health and social justice benefits, is a real interest of the medical facilities, especially, have benefits to the UC community and communities surrounding the campus, town-gown relations, and have climate benefits well beyond the credited reductions, recognizing the urgency of near-term reductions. So we explored the development of university-initiated offset projects. And I think this is the part of the program that most of us are really most excited about. We put out this request for ideas to faculty, students, staff, researchers across the 10 campuses. The idea is that if we develop our own projects, then we've tackled the additionality issue, right? We know, if we build our own projects, we know they're additional because we built them or got them off the ground. And also it tackles the quality issue because if we're developing our own projects, we can make sure that the quantification is aligned with the best science and is conservative. And then of course the mission alignment of research and education. So we put out this request for ideas, not knowing what we would get back. Okay. Yeah, not knowing what we would get back. What did I want to say about this? I mean, I think our main concern about the reason why it was such an experiment is it was an unusual call where, normally a call is either for research or for implementation projects. We were looking at the intersection of those two, where we were basically asking researchers to give us implementation projects for projects that would generate removals or reductions in scale enough to be meaningful for our large offset needs. We asked for a two-part proposal in that we offered pilot awards for seed awards that would help bring the project idea to a stage of being implemented at a scaled offset project. And in order to generate ideas for this unusual call, we very much went door to door. We visited each of the campuses. We contacted faculty that we knew had ideas. And we were available to answer questions for this unusual call. We also in the first stage set a relatively low bar, give us our ideas. Well, if we're interested, we'll ask you more questions in a second round. And it ended up being a success. We received 82 submissions back from faculty, students, and staff across the campuses. We narrowed it to 40 projects. I'm giving you all the details, or a bit more detail than I normally would in case there's interest there of doing something similar. So it was a several stage evaluation process. First narrowed based on objective criteria, then narrowed further with an evaluation committee with some informal peer reviews. We then invited second round submissions, giving us a bit more detail, expanded the proposal for both the offset project, the final offset project, as well as the work plan for the pilot part of the project that they were applying for. We asked for more refined analysis of quantifying reductions or removals and cost per ton. We asked specific questions, including questions of peer reviewers. And it worked. One thing that worked well was we asked for bronze, silver, and gold budgets, given that our own budget was limited. We asked for 3 different sized pilot projects. We put each of those through peer review, and the evaluation committee ended up recommending 12 projects for pilot awards. So here, 7 of them were international, and 7 of them are domestic. And they're all at various stages of the pilot award. Some of them have already handed us proposals for full-scale offset project and the project design document and the verification plan and all of that. And some of them are still more in the research stage. The international projects were different from the domestic projects in that these were more, much more implementation focused, where, like, for example, Unite to Light, a lighting institute at UC Santa Barbara had developed an efficient LED light, and this NGO, Unite to Light, had spun off of that effort, and this project is to support and expand the work of Unite to Light as an offset project. Very similar with the Berkeley Darfur Cook Stoves project, as well as the Ebony project and the work that this this UCLA Research Institute is doing in Cameroon on agroforestry. We also have reforestation, avoided deforestation, and this wonderful sort of combined project in very rural Tanzania. So for the projects in California, these are all much more research oriented. 2 of them are applying amendments to California lands, rock amendments, as well as biochar amendments. This one is it's research looking at how to bring down the production costs of red seaweed that could be used as feed for cattle to reduce enteric fermentation or methane emissions from cattle. This amazing project is put forward by a PhD student at UC Davis who's doing research on the potential to significantly reduce methane emissions from rice cultivation with a single mid-season drainage event, and working through extension with farmers in California to test and eventually, hopefully, implement this technology or this cultivation practice. Carbon absorbing concrete is the last one. Lessons learned from this whole process very quickly is that many of the strongest proposals came from individuals we personally contacted or campuses with someone who championed the RFI. It was an unusual call. It needed explaining through workshops and individual meetings. So it was work to get it off the ground and make it successful. Faculty use the RFI as a project-based education tool. It was a class project, and classes to submit ideas to it. The review process was intensive because it needed a range of assessment, scientific, and interdisciplinary feasibility and values. And teams needed more on the implementation side. Teams needed to be ready to work through the process of generating offsets. So our expertise to support the teams is really important in this process. Campuses should be ready to take the risk of providing upfront costs. So that's a greater risk by the university to help get these projects off the ground. But university-initiated projects can also hedge against rising and uncertain offset prices, especially with the increase of demand that we're seeing. Okay. So research of the quality of offsets on the voluntary market was the other sort of pillar of our offset program. Excuse me, I have a tickle. My throat. Okay. So the other part of what we did is we did research on the quality of offsets on the voluntary market in search of quality projects and project types that are quality by our definition. And we looked at a wide range of project types. We did intensive reviews of of 6 different project types and put them into sort of a hierarchy of highest quality to lowest quality to haven't yet vetted. And here's the results. So actually, let me first, if I can, okay, here's how we vetted the projects. Is we did an over-under crediting analysis where we looked across the for the project type, across the portfolio of projects under the protocol, as well as subtypes of projects, looking for the protocol or protocol subtypes where we can categorically accept those credits as quality. And we focus on project types because of the RFP process. It's much easier to go out with an RFP with very concrete criteria. So we were seeking those criteria for vetted quality projects. We did an over and under crediting analysis, looking at the entire, looking at the protocol for that pool of projects, looking at additionality, baselines, leakage, perverse incentives, risk, endurability or permanence. For those project types where that are already going forward to some extent, we looked at the non-additional projects that are participating, that are inevitably participating. Is that level of non-additional crediting counterbalanced by other conservativeness in the protocol that undercredits to counterbalance the overcrediting? And we did that for project types as well as for projects. So for project types, here are the categories. So highest quality meets our minimum quality standards, which is basically doesn't overcredit and doesn't cause harm. And the other is on a path towards deep decarbonization, meets our minimum quality standards and also has additional co-benefits, meets UC's minimum quality standards, not necessarily with other co-benefits. Tier 3 meets UC's minimum quality standards with some compromises. So we found 2 protocols that are in this tier 3, clean water borehole projects. The new version of the gold standard methodology is unlikely to be over, across the portfolio, unlikely to be overcredited. And if you can accept something called suppressed demand in the baseline, where just really quickly, some participants are replacing inefficient cook stoves or boiling of water to purify the water with the borehole water. Some households are not boiling water because it's too expensive or too difficult. And all sets of households are considered eligible based on this idea of equity, that everyone should have access to clean water. So whether you do or you don't, you're treated as if you do or you soon will have access to the basic human right of clean water. So the question is, are we going to accept suppressed demand as the baseline? Ozone depleting substances, this protocol with an initial review looks to, it's having an impact on destroying CFCs, but it's also overcrediting because of some non-additional participation. And we're still looking at the rate of non-additional crediting, but are putting that out there as sort of best of what we can find from projects in the US so far. Not categorically accepted, but with individual projects that could meet UC's minimum quality standards, afforestation, reforestation. Tier 5 protocols systematically overcredit, so it's unlikely to even find individual projects to do individual project vetting. Improve forest management with these protocols, as I've discussed. We're currently reviewing cook stoves and landfill gas, as well as RED. And then all other project types, they can be individually vetted and go through the peer review process. To meet UC's immediate offset needs for our interim targets starting in 2020, which are different from the full carbon neutrality in 2025, we needed more credit. So we also looked at individual projects, and we found sort of a subset of cook stoves projects and one large reforestation project that with individual review is not unlikely to overcredit. So those are the projects are in yellow. And what I want to discuss is basically what we found by looking at the voluntary market is that there's systematic overcrediting across protocols and registries, and that the what it looks to us like is happening is that, or to me, what's happening is that a lot of the offset protocols are developed by the developers themselves. So they come at this with the perspective of, we want to get projects off the ground. Offsets can be a much needed financial incentive for much needed climate mitigation. And looking for project types where there needs to be more money, that money can cause more of these projects to go forward. And then any project is allowed to participate of those project types, sort of ignoring that once you create the subsidy, you still have to do that net to gross analysis and look at what's additional and what's non-additional, and under credit or counter and discount in a way that counterbalances the non-additional participation. The way these really work is they work as an incentive. Once you create the protocol, any project is allowed to participate, and they aren't doing that net to gross analysis. And also what I've seen is that across the board, let me put it at that. So what are the possible ways forward, given this current state of the offset market, is that universities can commit to only procuring quality offsets, which means developing our own projects, or potentially partnering, seeking out those high quality projects, whether they're currently offsets or not, and partnering with NGOs and partners that are doing really good work and helping build supply of quality credits, at least until the market tightens up and can offer us more quality credits. Or we can do what we're currently doing, and carefully vetting projects on the market, and by doing so create a demand for quality credits. And just to mention, a lot of companies are shifting to only procuring engineered removals or only procuring removals, in the recognition that we not only need to reduce emissions as quickly as possible, we also need to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And a productive role for offsets going forward is to incentivize a carbon drawdown. Another set of approaches is to shift away from offsets, to focus on a decarbonization target, or to shift to a contributions approach where we reduce emissions to the decarbonization target, and we basically tax ourselves for the remaining emissions and use those to make a contribution. We don't need to engage with a broken offset market. We can focus our contributions and our funds in a way that can have that we see as having the most impact on climate change, given who we are. And in either case, I think we need to commit to always reporting direct emissions and offset separately rather than the net figure. And okay, so let me quickly go through the remainder, and then let's open it up for discussion and questions. Developing policies and procedures, basically, for the we're doing the UC initiated each year. For the voluntary market, we would purchase just from the top tier of 2 or in the interim tier 3, and over time we would vet more and more. The vetted project lists would continue to expand and be updated as more research on offset quality is published, as protocols are updated based on research, hopefully, and as UC performs our own assessments of project types as well as developers and quality assessors. I think one really productive thing that we can also do is to partner with specific projects that are doing good work and expand quality supply that way. We'll soon release guidance for other universities and colleges. And just a last 2 thoughts is, big picture, why after 20 years of learning by doing in the offset market are we still overcrediting by so much? And I think part of it is, what I mentioned, that the offset industry is really looking at how can we get funds going into climate mitigation, rather than a concern for making sure that the credits have quality in their trade. I think there's also in other ways that the offset industry structure is a perfect storm for poor quality, and that is there are very high levels of uncertainty. Estimates of additionality, baselines, leakage are all highly uncertain. We know how to measure emissions. It's much harder to measure emissions reductions because you have to measure reductions against a counterfactual scenario that never happened and therefore is inherently uncertain. And this uncertainty buffers the system from critique in that, the registry says this is quality, and then some researcher says this is not quality, and it's really hard for, it's a complex interdisciplinary analysis of quality. It's hard for any buyer to distinguish what's what. Uncertainty allows discretion in quality assessments by the market players, and we have a set of market players that have a conflict of interest, have a financial interest in a larger market and therefore in a poor quality market, where buyers financially want inexpensive credits. Sellers want to sell more credits. The third-party verifier wants to be hired again and is hired by the project developer themselves. And registries themselves that are writing the rules also benefit from larger markets. And I think we're stuck in a poor quality loop in that on the developer side, if I'm a forest landowner and there's a quality offset protocol that I could choose, or I could go for a lower quality one and get 4 or 5 times the number of credits, I'm going to choose the poorer quality one, unless there's a strong push for higher quality. On the buyer side, it's the presence of inexpensive offsets makes it harder to justify large expenditures and the complexity of doing projects like electrification. And it also makes it harder to justify high quality offsets when there are poor quality offsets that are registry certified. So I think it's a difficult problem, and I think universities have an important role to play in that. So far, the offset market has been like a wild west of projects and registries and protocols. And now there are all these institutions that are assessing quality. And that's also a wild west. And I think, you take a look at the registries, and we've had government registries and we've had private registries, but they all have this, tension of uncertainty and wanting to get these projects off the ground, the low quality carbon, the low quality loop. And I think universities are trusted. University offset buyers can play a large role by doing research-based purchasing and doing the research, which at the university scale is trusted by the public. And I would propose a University Buyers Alliance and having a set of universities and colleges come together and commit to reporting direct emissions separately from offsets, only procuring quality offsets, or shifting away from offsets and going with a deeper decarbonization target. And I think in terms of offset procurement, I think we can make a big difference by coming together and doing this research and putting our buying power behind quality. And let me end there and open for, I'm really looking forward to the discussion and questions.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Barbara. I'm going to open up to Mike or Noah. Any questions you guys might have about Mike Shelton?
Sure, I'll kick us off and really appreciate that dialogue and presentation. A lot of great information sharing there, both kind of globally and specifically what UC is doing. So that was fantastic. I have 2 questions. One is more of a clarifying question, the first one, and that is as the UC program is looking at developing its own projects, is the intention to work through the appropriate protocols to then develop third-party verified credits that could otherwise go to market, and the university is just going to retire those against its own footprint? Or is it really more of a calculation, an internal calculation of what those credits represent that the university is going to essentially take credit for? So that's first question. Second question is, more globally, given all of your statements around emissions and the Wild West nature of the emission market or the offset market, from a philosophical standpoint, knowing that there's only so many resources at higher ed institutions to achieve these, really large scale goals, at what point does an institution look to invest in offsets versus direct emission reduction efforts, reducing its energy use and other efforts? At what point in the journey should that come into play? So I'll take myself on mute for those answers.
I'm so happy that you asked those two important questions. So for the first question on the registry, so for the 12 UC initiated offset projects, hopefully all of them will become full-scale projects. Currently, the university system is requiring all of the projects to go through the registries. And and almost all of the projects, if not all of them, are able to with existing methodologies. And that would require, choosing an existing project, an existing methodology, using it, going through the whole third-party verification application process. One thing that we're doing with our peer review process is looking at the methods used. If you go with the registry, you're locked into the methods used by the protocol, so you can't do a more refined. There's a limit to how much you can do a more refined science-based carbon reduction calculation. But what we are doing is going through the peer review process, making sure that we at least aren't over-crediting. And if we are, finding ways in the protocol to make sure that we aren't over-crediting. And where there's flexibility in the protocol, sort of bringing in our research to have a more refined analysis where possible. On the registry question, there's a real debate in that there's an organization called Offset Network, which started at Duke University, and now it's being run by Second Nature, that allows universities to peer review each other's offset projects rather than going through the third-party registry. The justification for that is twofold. One, for smaller projects, it's just not cost effective to go through third-party, the expense of third-party verification in the registry. So that allows to do these smaller projects cost effectively. It also involves students in doing the verification. So it's like this beautiful program of bringing in student teams from other universities to do the actual on the ground verification, look at the numbers against the methodology. And then the third benefit is for those project types that are new and innovative, which is what universities do. It allows us to write our own protocols and innovate, and those protocols can become registry protocols over time, but Offset Network is the first step to doing that and allowing a wider set of project types to participate with more refined methods for calculating emissions reductions. There are pros and cons of, just really quickly, there are pros and cons of both approaches, right? If going the registry route locks you into the expense and the methodologies that are out there with all of their limitations and weaknesses. But you do get like the third-party verification process. If you go the Offset Network route, or just doing projects and calculating our emissions reductions, I think a lot of the concern is that then becomes a Wild West. We can trust ourselves to do a good job, but if institutions just start to do their own projects and verify their own reductions, the Offset Network is a great approach, but is that something that can be widely used? So that's the consideration. We are considering going the Offset Network approach, but we haven't yet gone through that route. For your second question, you asked about direct emissions reductions versus buying offsets. And this is a real debate right now going on at the University of California. And let me just take a step back in my own thinking, sort of not just at the university, but looking at company carbon neutrality goals, and sort of at the edge of my thinking, like some days I wake up and I'm like, what are we doing? We're resting the stability of the Earth's climate on a program that hasn't worked for 20 years, where there are really good institutional embedded reasons why it doesn't work and why it's difficult. We just need to throw offsets away. What are we doing? And then other days I wake up and I'm like, all of these corporations and universities have taken on carbon neutrality goals and are putting money into climate mitigation that they wouldn't have put in otherwise. What I keep hearing is that there's a magic to that zero number. And there's power to just being able to buy credits off of the market, where purchasers are willing to buy the credits, but they don't see themselves as philanthropists. They're not going to pool money and give it to an organization, but they will buy those credits. So some days I wake up and I'm like, we just need to make the offset market work. And thinking through, well, here's what needs to happen. And I mean, I believe it's the process that I've developed for UC. And can we get a real quality process through a set of buyers like universities working with major companies to really push the market towards quality? Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Michael, if I could follow up, and I'm just kind of curious whether the Sustainability Institute looks at our university itself. I drive up, 315, and I look at all the cranes and the construction and development, university medical towers. I just wonder if we've actually done an evaluation of what our carbon footprint is there on the university itself with concrete and steel that's went up the last 5 years and is proposed for the next 5 years. It's kind of hard to think about our university itself, how many offsets we'd have to purchase to get the net zero. It seems like it might be a very, very large and expensive number.
Yeah, we do conduct an annual carbon footprint assessment. At FY21 was just under 400,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalents. So it's a large number.
Yeah, I saw a question in the question box regarding agriculture, and I'll give you my experience of the last year as I've talked to farmers across Ohio. And I guess what's really kind of, well, first of all, I doubt if Ohio State would want to try to individually negotiate or buy credits from the number of farmers it would take to offset or even inset carbon. So I think there's going to be a third party involved with whatever Ohio State would decide to do, whether they ever want to go down the agricultural track. And that brings me to the point is there's so many companies out there right now that are approaching the farmers particularly in the Corn Belt to either purchase offsets, but they're kind of muddying it when we've got food processors and commodity buyers that want to say, well, we'll do an insert, we'll give you credit for something so they can take credit downstream on that. So farmers are somewhat, I just use the word confused and with what's going on in the global marketplace, especially, I hate it, Barbara, around inserts more than offsets, because it seems like that's where the food industry wants to go. Just maybe your comment there, Barbara. California's done it too. I can sell low carbon corn to an ethanol plant in California.
Right. I mean, a few thoughts. I mean, one, I don't think we could ever call commodities carbon neutral. Carbon neutral if they buy offsets. Okay, you're talking about low carbon ethanol because of changes in the way that they, right. Sorry. Produce the ethanol. And double counting. I haven't thought so much about the double counting, forgive me. Yeah, but I know that it's an issue. Just one thought on agriculture in that if the university is considering partnering with farmers, I think it's much better to actually work with farmers directly rather than buying these credits off of the market, because then you know that you're making a difference because you're partnering with someone and changing their practice with a program, rather than, like I said, with the market, it allows in non-additional as well as additional participation.
There you go, Mike. We need to push that forward. I think that's a great idea. I'm talking to both Mikes on this one. Let's get the mic. Come on now.
Well, yeah, that's gonna be a long, rough road to hoe, but you got to start somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're right. I think not to mention any particular companies, there's 4 or 5 major ones that are in Ohio, but I think there's a certain level of I don't want to use the word distrust, but the whole total lack of transparency within the third-party offset market. I think, Barbara, you may have a point where if the farmer was dealing directly with the buyer, not the broker, there may be a little lessening of that distrust and a little more transparency.
I agree.
Yeah, I would just say from I certainly don't speak for all of the university and where we might invest in offsets, but certainly the more local we can invest our resources, the benefit, that just benefits the communities that we work in and work with. So whether that's the city of Columbus or Mansfield or Marion, wherever we have campuses, or our ag communities that Extension and others are working in, that makes a lot of sense to recycle those dollars, so to speak, back into the community that we serve and that we work with. I will say, I maybe to Mike's point, given the scale, we would need a lot of participation in the ag community to generate the number of credits that we would need for offsets. So that's no small feat when that market essentially does not exist as of today. So a lot of work to be done to develop that.
I guess my last comment there would be, the Ohio State University is a large landowner. We have a lot of farms around the state of Ohio, and I think just to develop awareness, to be a good partner, it might be behoove us to really put it out there that even our farming practices are with the goal of going toward net neutrality or decarbonization of agriculture. So that's maybe a conversation for Dean Kress and you to have.
Well, I'm jumping over to Noah just a second. I just want to make a quick comment on that. And Barbara, maybe you probably would agree with this. If you look at all of the UN goals related to, and the IPCC statements related to getting to net zero, every one of them indicate that the ag and forestry sectors have to get there first, approximately 30 years before the rest of the world does. So I mean, that's a good point that, OSU Farms can sort of lead the way on showing how those entities can become carbon neutral, and that can potentially help as a research goal, the rest of the sector become carbon neutral, because it has to happen before the rest, all the other sectors in the overall economy become carbon neutral. It's, that's kind of prerequisite. Anyways, just a thought on that.
Thanks, Brent. Barbara, I would like to shift gears and talk a little bit about what you spoke about a few minutes ago with regard to overcrediting. And, I want to talk just a little bit about the compliance entities who have a compliance obligation under Assembly Bill 32 and the California carbon market. We're seeing a dramatic increase in carbon prices globally on these markets. We saw prices shoot up really high just in the last few months with RGGI, double. We saw prices shoot up really high with the California auctions. And increasingly, it seems to be the case that compliance entities are getting a smaller share of those permits, of those allowances. seems to be a lot more involvement by banks, hedge funds, speculators, and non-mercantile, non-compliance customers in these markets. And when you see a price increase for carbon permits, that in many ways signals an economic incentive for overcrediting in the offset market as an alternative compliance mechanism. Looking at some of the forecasts for where carbon prices might be, I saw a forecast today at $55 in the next year or so. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe it is. Maybe we'll see $55 a ton carbon prices. But as we see prices edge upward, do you anticipate that we're going to see an even greater challenge with regard to reversal risk, with regard to invalidation risk, and just overcrediting in general as an economic incentive for some of these projects?
Interesting. I mean, I've always hoped that as prices rise, then it's enough. I mean, initially when prices are low, it's not enough to really incentivize changes in practice. So you just get non-additional crediting, because the only entities that can afford to participate are those that would have, where it's already cost effective to do the to build a manure methane digester. So like it's mostly non-additional, but as prices rise, it's a sufficient incentive to really change practices and get new projects off the ground.
So it changes the baseline of what is additional.
It makes it, you get the same non-additional participation. Or let's say, let's say that, the monitoring and verification costs are not too great, so that any non-additional project, it makes sense to pay the monitoring and costs, and they participate. And as prices go up, you can also bring in more and more truly additional projects, because it becomes more, as prices go up, it's enough to really incentivize changes.
You're saying as those carbon prices go up, we're going to see price triggers incentivize greater offset projects
that are truly additional.
Right, rather than creating an economic incentive for so-called gaming.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess you also get more of an economic incentive for gaming.
So why would you spend that much money when you can just overcredit, and you're going to get quite a bit more money, twice as much in the last year for those projects, for selling those offset credits? You know what I mean? So I guess it's an economic question. We'd have to look at the cost curve, but I'm curious if you're seeing anything, what you're observing in California with respect to quality of those offsets, and if there's any real kind of concern among stakeholders, investors, even those insuring some of the offset projects, if they have any real concern about some of that reversal risk in a high price environment as we move closer to that price trigger.
Can you say a bit more? Why, as prices go up, would there be more of reversal risk? I see. You're saying that more and more lands would choose to participate.
Yeah, I mean, the incentive to overcredit is as you described pretty adequately, there's a financial incentive to do so. You're going to make money on the overcrediting. There's going to be something that you're selling additional.
I mean, you would always overcredit, right? Like, why would, if you participate, whether prices are low or prices are high, you have an incentive to get the most credits as you can, and set an exaggerated baseline, choose.
But as the cost of compliance increases on carbon permits, there's greater scarcity on the carbon permit market.
Yeah.
Quite right. I mean, it's going to lead to greater scarcity on the offset market as well.
Yeah.
So you're probably going to see, I'm just speculating here, this is purely, an empirical question, but I'm speculating that we're going to potentially see a greater incentive to kind of inflate some of the offset value of some of these offsets.
Right. I would say, and push back, is that currently, you've got these set protocols, and anyone who participates is going to choose baseline emissions factors, calculate emissions reductions in a way that maximizes the number of credits, regardless of what the price is, right? If you're going to participate, you're going to try to maximize the income. What higher prices does is it creates an incentive for more and more participation. And certainly you can get more participation from truly additional projects, which is like what the whole purpose of the offset program should be. You could also get more participation from those that are business as usual as it becomes more and more lucrative to participate. To the extent that the protocols systematically overcredit, the more participation you have, the more overcrediting you have, just period.
On basis. Yeah. It's, I'm curious what the profit margin differential will be if prices do get that high, and what that might do to incentives of some of these project developers. And I guess we're going into, if these prices stay as high as they currently are, we're going into kind of unforeseen territory. But you raise a really interesting point about really kind of raising that baseline and incentivizing additional projects with a higher price trigger. Thank you, Barbara.
Two more quick thoughts. I just want to say, Michael Shelton, on the decarbonization, it's my personal view that it's always more important to decarbonize. Like the most important thing that we all can do is decarbonize, because of all the uncertainty with offsets, and just because we all need to decarbonize as quickly as possible, and we need to remove carbon from the atmosphere as quickly as possible. You can't, buying offsets is not the same as reducing your own emissions. Reducing your own emissions should always be our first priority. It's our responsibility to do that. And then I see really quickly, there's a question about wildfires in California, in Pacific Northwest. Yes, there have been fires that have caused reversals, and a paper came out documenting how the reversal risk, the quantification of reversal risk for these improved forest management offset projects in the US is undervaluing the real risk of wildfire due to climate change. So yes, we need to have a higher deduction for risks of wildfire in the US, especially in the Pacific Northwest.
That's great. Any other questions out there?
I just want to say this has been really educational for me, Barbara. So thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. And as you're debating what to do there, I'm very happy to talk again and share our experience and brainstorm.
Yeah, just by way of closure for myself as well. I'm one who studies the carbon offsets pretty intensively, and I learned an enormous amount today. For that, I'm really greatly appreciative of the work you've done, Barbara, as well as your willingness to come in. And well, you didn't get to come in, but we didn't get to bring you to Ohio in the middle of winter. I'm very sorry about that. I know you're deeply depressed about that as well. So, but in any event, we're really, really happy you were able to visit with us on this webinar. It's been super helpful. I got a ton of notes myself here. I'll probably follow up with you with some questions. I know just through my interactions for folks here still on, feel free to email Barbara. She's always willing to respond and chat with you about questions you might have. So with that, we'll call it to a close, and thanks, Barbara, for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was wonderful talking to you, and let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, Noah, Kathy,